Alright, so this video is going to be the first one for chapter 3. It's going to be pretty short. We're just going to look at one objective. And so this whole chapter is going to be about just kind of a basic biology review. We're going to focus on cells. And so remember that life is organized. Atoms make up everything. They're kind of the starting point. But when we start talking about living things, that's where we get into the cell level and higher. So atoms make up molecules and molecules and compounds make up those big macromolecules like carbs and proteins and lipids and nucleic acids. And then those macromolecules make up the organelles, which are just little tiny organs that you'll find in the cell. But it's not until we get to the cell level where we actually have a living thing, okay? So the cell theory is just a set of 3 statements, and it's just dealing with cells and how they are the smallest unit of life. And so the cell theory consists of 3 statements, the first one being the cell is the smallest unit of life. Now, sometimes you'll see this stated as the cell is the basic unit of life. It's essentially saying the same thing. And so organelles by themselves are not alive. Macromolecules by themselves are not alive. Life begins at the cell level. The second statement is that all organisms, sometimes you'll see this as living things, okay? All organisms are made up of 1 or more cells. And so there are some living things like bacteria or things like a protist where they're just 1 cell. So all organisms are made up of at least 1, possibly more. Like for instance, we are made up of trillions of cells that are working together. But in order to be considered a living thing, there must be at least 1 or more cells. And then the third statement is that cells arise from other cells. And so there was a time way back in history where people believed that living things could arise from non-living matter. And that was later disproven. And so we now know that cells come from other cells. Living things come from other living things. And in our bodies, we have 2 main types of division. And simply put, we can just call them mitosis and meiosis or meiosis. Now, mitosis is actually part of the cell cycle, which we're going to learn about at the end of this chapter. And mitosis is part of the process that makes somatic or body cells. So anytime we want to make new skin or bone or blood, just pretty much almost all of the cells that make up our body, they're going to go through a process called mitosis, which is part of the cell cycle. And then there's another type of cell that you'll find in your body, and they're called gametes or sex cells. And so in our bodies, this is going to take place in the ovaries for women and in the testes for men. But meiosis, or what I call meiosis, is another type of cell division where we're making sex cells. And what's significant about them is that they only have half of the chromosome number. So that way when they come together to make an offspring, it equals a whole. And so once again, this is not as common. This is only happening in the ovaries and testes to make those sex cells. But big idea is that cells do come from other cells. And so question number 1, which of the following is not a characteristic of the cell theory? So choice A, all cells come from other cells. That's statement number 3. Organisms are made of 1 cell or more than 1 cell. Yes, that's statement number 2. And the cell is the smallest unit of life. Yes, that's statement number 1. And so the answer is going to be D. And the reason for that is because not all cells contain organelles like a nucleus. In fact, we can put cells into 2 main groups, either prokaryotes or eukaryotes. And a prokaryotic cell, like a bacteria, they do not have a nucleus. They do not have organelles like mitochondria. And so a cell doesn't have to have these, but all 3 of these things are actually part of the cell theory. And that is going to cover objective 1.